So to me, this is a really important subject, and I think I've been thinking about it one way or another for almost as long as I've been playing. And I think this thing about sounding like yourself, if you think about it, for me, most of the musicians that I really love the most, they sound like themselves. They don't sound like someone else. T-Bone Walker doesn't sound like anybody else. Mose Allison does not sound like anybody else. And this may sound incredibly obvious, but I think it's easy to forget that most of these people had their own heroes and role models who they either couldn't sound quite like or managed or chose not to. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say even someone like Eric Clapton, who clearly, on some level, really wanted very badly to sound like his heroes, to sound like Freddie King, to play like B.B. King, even someone like that, I think, I'd argue like Eric Clapton makes his most distinctive work when he is being Eric Clapton, when he's writing Layla, when he's writing Bell Bottom Blues, when he's writing, even Tears in Heaven. I mean, that sounds like Eric Clapton. That doesn't sound like B.B. King anymore. That doesn't sound like anybody else. He's got a way of putting chord progressions together and a way of putting songs together and a way of doing all that that sounds really personal and really like him, even though, he obviously greatly admires these other people. I started thinking about this in part because I spent a little bit of time in graduate school, and I was already thinking about like what kind of music I liked. Like I went to study in graduate school because I was really into Duke Ellington and the modern jazz quartet and these sort of composerly jazz musicians whose music I really liked. And then I got there, and all anybody wanted to talk about was Miles Davis and John Coltrane, who are also, composing jazz musicians, but it was all about like how do these guys improvise and what do they do with that. And that's all fantastic, and it took me a really long time to come to an appreciation of them, but I did. But at the same time, I just thought, well, these guys have a canon. They have at this school, they have the people they've put together, and like the great books. It's like everybody should learn Shakespeare and Milton and read Moby Dick and whatever. And they had their canon for what jazz is, and I had mine, and they weren't the same. And so it was kind of, I had to start and think, well, why is that? And what am I thinking about that they're not thinking about, and vice versa? And so one of the first steps to figuring out like who you are and what you sound like is to just stop and take a look at what do you like, which again sounds really obvious, but what do you like the most? And not just, I kind of like that, or I have some of that, or I'm listening to that because I heard it was good, but like, what do you love? Like, what do you really like to listen to? What do you put on and you're just like, oh man, it's like, it's springtime and it's a gorgeous day out and I'm a kid again and just the world feels amazing. Like everybody's got music like that. Like what does that for you? What do you love? And just starting to figure out like what's your canon? Like what's your, how would you put together, what are your great books? What do you think is like the way it's done best? And that's really the first step to sounding like yourself, is really figuring out like what do you like? Because the next thing is to learn some of that, not to be those people, but to figure out what makes it tick. Like what's going on in that music? Because we are musicians, and so you want to get in there and get under the hood and go like, what is it? How does it work? So that you can have some of that. I mean, like, that's how you get a piece of that musician's essence for yourself, is you go in and you figure out how it's done. So there's a great value in that. I'm not saying not to learn how other people play at all. Like you want to get in there and like figure it out. And sometimes it's worth it. Sometimes you haven't figured out yet what you do and don't like, so you're kind of learning everything or learning a bit of everything. You don't have to master the styles or the playing of the people that you like. Like I think at one point when I was talking in one of these lessons about transcribing, I was like, you don't have to learn the whole solo. You just learn a few bars, just start to figure out what's going on. You can learn more if you want to, but just start to get a sense of what's going on under the hood, and figure out what that's about in a really tactile, hands-on way. Now the third part, these things are all kind of like, this isn't really linear, like these are just like sort of the different pieces that are going on. But one of the things I think that got me thinking about this early on was seeing Gatemouth Brown say in an interview like that he wouldn't imitate anybody else, that he wanted to have his own thing. And I was hosting a workshop where he was doing a clinic, and I said, what did you mean? Like how soon should you start working on your own thing? And his answer was, as soon as you have the basics down. And I was thinking, oh great, like what does that mean? Like what are the basics, and how do you know when you have them down? But I guess now that I have thought about it more, I would say, you got to be able to play with a good time, and you got to have a good understanding of, if you're going to do any of the kinds of things that we've been talking about here in terms of playing, which again, totally subjective, but for the kind of playing I'm interested in, for the kind of playing I've been talking about in these videos, how notes and chords relate, basically. How do notes go over chords, which is a really simple hands-on way of talking about improvising music theory, just like how those things go together, just having a flexible, on-the-fly understanding of how the pieces that we're working with fit together, so that as you're playing, you can start to work with them. And now, again, like this isn't a linear process, like you're always probably working on that. I know I am, and just trying to figure out, like, you need a certain amount of that at the beginning, and then as you get into more interesting and more complicated things, maybe you need more of that. Maybe you dress away. You start off doing a bunch of complicated things, learning the modes, learning all these voicings, and then you figure out, I really want to just play these 3-chord songs. I don't need all that. So there's a real give and take, but just understanding what you need to know about playing a good groove, playing in time, and understanding the relationships between melody and harmony, like those are the basics as far as I'm concerned. And so that's a piece of it, because you got to be able to manipulate and work with those things to do any of this, whether you're doing it like someone else or doing it like yourself. And so that idea of sort of like maybe you finding out what you do and don't actually need in terms of complexity kind of leads to the next thing, which is get rid of the stuff that you don't like, or stop worrying about it. Now, there are some records that I've held on to for 20 or 30 years because I've thought, everybody talks about this as like a pinnacle of the art form. So there's something here I gotta understand. And so, I had this experience with being in grad school and not understanding why everybody was in such a lather about Coltrane and Miles. And sure enough, like 20 years later, I found a reason to put on, a couple of those records and go like, oh my God, they must have been talking about this. Now I get it. Now this is something that I have a window into. Because my ears had kind of come along and I'd listened to all these other things that preceded it, and suddenly it was like, oh yeah, now I have a context for this and I see how it does its thing. So I'm not saying just like, shut your ears off and stop listening and have a closed mind, but there's so much to do, and there's so many kinds of things you could be learning, that at some point you got to go like, this is my turf, and I'm just not going to worry about these other things. I had a kid come up to me one time when I was teaching, 14 or 15, and he was like, man, I can't do this. I can do this thing, but I can't do that. And I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to, and I'm really bummed out about it. And I was like, let's think about this. So here's B.B. King, and here's Muddy Waters, two giants of the blues, right? Both almost, you can make a case for either one being like the epitome of the art form, right? B.B. King can't play slide, and Muddy Waters can't solo like B.B. King. So, there it is. In fact, B.B. King invented his vibrato because he couldn't play slide like his cousin Booker White. So if he hadn't bumped up against the limitation of not being able to play slide, if he was one of those guys who like could do everything, and there's a few of those out there, and they're, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe like they can do this and that and this and that, If BB was one of those guys, then no vibrato, no B.B. King vibrato. And where would we be without that? We'd be missing this huge piece of the language. So nobody can do everything, or most people can't. And it's cool to be omnivorous and take in as much as you can. But at some point, if you want to have your own point of view, you have to act as a filter and start to dress away everything. It's that old joke about like, how do you carve a statue of an elephant? Well, you get a 5-ton block of granite and you chip away everything that doesn't look like an elephant, right? So you've got to do that with yourself. You can't You'll go crazy if you're trying to be everything and do everything. At some point, you got to plant your flag and go like, I'm going to work in this little area here and try to get that good. And if you've brought in these different things that you like, then as you filter out the things you don't like, you start to go, oh, like I like this and this and this, and they all kind of, they go together like this. There's this great moment when they were asking Ry Cooder, where he gets these ideas, for the way that he makes his records. He said, well, I get these daydreams, like, I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was something like, what if a mariachi band was playing Lead Belly songs, or, just like colliding these things together, and you sort of get this spark from the collision. So if you like this and you like that, and you bring them into your little territory and try to find a way to reconcile them, something interesting is going to happen. It might be messy and it might not work, but you try it and you see, and you do enough of those little experiments, and you start to figure out like, oh, like I like it when things go like this, but not when they go like that. And you start to build this like your own sense of aesthetics, really, like your own sense of what's going on. Now, I think that the thing that is, I don't know, certainly I know this for me, like a thing that can keep you from doing that is, the sense that, well, like there's so much great music I haven't mastered. Who am I to try to even do my own thing, right? But so what? Like that's what everybody good is doing. They're not doing everything. B.B. King is going, well, I guess I'm not going to play slide in this lifetime. And Muddy Waters is going, well, I'm not going to be playing like, jazzy solos on a 335. Like people are making choices all the time. Think about the people you love. Look at all the things they're not doing at any given one time. Some people aren't writing songs. Some people aren't playing the guitar. Some people, aren't producing, and some people don't know how to put things together in the studio. Some people can't play the saxophone. Like everybody's got a bunch of things. Horace Silver was playing gigs on piano and saxophone because he loved Lester Young. But eventually he got on a gig with, I don't know, Ben Webster or somebody, and he was like, I guess I'm not going to be a saxophone player this time around. And so he composed some of the greatest jazz tunes of all time and led a fantastic band and didn't play the saxophone. So that's cool. He was still Horace Silver. So those are some steps. The last one, which I guess I've already been talking about, is, you apply all this to the music you want to play. That's where the sparks come from. The kind of songs you want to play, or the kind of songs you want to write, or the kind of band you want to be in, or whatever it is. You take all of this, bringing in, winnowing, getting your chops together, filtering out, and you end up with this point of view, and you apply that to what you're doing. Now, again, it's not linear. Like you can go back and forth across all of these different steps at various points in your life and in your learning. You're not going to get necessarily to a point where you go like, this is it, I'm done. Because again, if you look at the people you really admire, they get to a point, they make some great work, and they're kind of like, well, let's look over here, or let's make this kind of record, or now I'm into this kind of music. I'm not saying that, you're going to arrive there and just be there, and you may just feel like you're getting there the whole time, and that's okay too, as long as you're kind of hunting for it. So those are some steps to take. It's really just thinking about it in the first place, just having the willingness to say like, oh, I could be looking for something of my own. That would be cool. So I recommend doing that. So if you got any thoughts about that, questions or comments, please leave them down below. I would love to hear what you have to say, and I'll see you next time.